Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Professor Roy Gardner. I'm the director of the Institute for Biodiversity Law and Policy, and welcome to our first Edward and Bonnie Foreman Biodiversity Lecture of the spring semester. Woo. And a special welcome to those of you who are joining us in DeLand via video. And many thanks to Dr. Ben Tanner for facilitating this cross-campus connection. The lecture series is made possible through the generous support of Bonnie Foreman. She's a great friend of Stetson. She is a university trustee. She is a member of the College of Law's Board of Overseers, and she's just a wonderful person. Bonnie could not be with us today, but please let's thank Bonnie for all of her support and friendship over the years, and we especially appreciate her support of this lecture series, because it's more than just a one-off talk. These lectures have created linkages and relationships. It's led to student internships, to collaborations with the Environmental Law Institute, to an amicus brief before the U.S. Supreme Court that Stetson students contributed to, and even Stetson's hosting of an international sea turtle treaty meeting that we held right here in the Great Hall. And then all of this leads to other opportunities. And today's lecture was actually the impetus for the creation of a short course on illegal wildlife trafficking. So we built that course around today's lecture, and many of you are taking that course. I had the honor of meeting today's speaker, Vivek Menon, last January at our International Wildlife Law Conference in India, and I'm so delighted and grateful that you could join us today. He is a wildlife conservationist, environmental commentator, author, and photographer with a passion for elephants and other wildlife. The winner of the 2001 Rufford Award for International Conservation for his work to save the Asian elephant, Vivek is the founder, executive director, and CEO of the Wildlife Trust of India, as well as an advisor to the International Fund for Animal Welfare. He works at the national and the international level. At the national level in India, he advises the government on natural heritage conservation as part of several committees, including the Project Elephant Steering Committee and the CITES Advisory Committee. CITES is the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, which we'll be hearing a little bit about shortly. Internationally, just to mention a few of his activities and responsibilities, since 2013, he has served as chair of the IUCN Asian Elephant Specialist Group. He's served as a consultant to the Kenya Wildlife Services and helped establish the first elephant reserve in Myanmar. He has trained wildlife officers of over 50 countries in wildlife crime prevention and has attended CITES meetings for over 20 years as a technical advisor to the Indian delegation and as an observer. He's a prolific author of articles, technical reports, and books, including the recently published best-selling Indian Mammals, a Field Guide. And he's also a great speaker. Please welcome Vivek Menon.
Thank you, Roy. Boy, I didn't know I did all that. That's good to get a reminder. Anyway. Okay, I hope I know how this works. Yes, it does. Friends, I'm extremely happy to come here all the way from India, especially because my last two stops were in Munich and Chicago and it was -5. So getting to Florida is a real relief. Seeing all of you is even better. To see such a lot of all of you interested in biodiversity, interested in environmental law, gives me hope. Because one of the things that I've felt in 35 odd years of talking to various sets of people around the world is that I normally meet exactly the same, either the same people, which is very depressing, or the same sort of people at least. So to speak to a relatively new kind of audience is a great pleasure. Lawyers can do a lot. And hold on, I'm not going to tell you now what you can do till you listen to at least part of my lecture. But that's what I've constructed this lecture around, is what you could do and how you could help in the crisis facing an animal that I'm personally very passionate about. But before that, he did tell you about who I am in terms of my CV. But one thing I wanted to tell you is that to save an animal, you have to put on completely different kinds of hats. Now, I was fascinated by the elephant 30 odd years ago, 35 years in fact, to the date. But I've done many things, including pure science, which is what gets me to be the chair of the Asian Elephant Specialist Group, I suppose, and that's important. And science, not just science in terms of science in a laboratory, but being fascinated by things around you and being eager to get out. Even today, as Roy knows, even in Florida where there are no elephants, I want to get out and see and absorb. So that is a key part of who I am. I founded 5 organizations in India, the latest of which the Wildlife Trust of India I talked about. But all 5 are alive and well. And every 20 years or so, I seem to move out of one and get into another. There's no point in having all this knowledge and or having done all this work if you can't communicate. And therefore, I'm a serial talker as well. I give lectures, probably over 100 a year across the world, and I write. I write 5 columns a month in Indian newspapers and Indian magazines, and I write books. He told you that I've trained a number of countries, which gives me great pleasure to see that today the heads of wildlife of, for example, Kazakhstan and Syria and New Zealand are all my former students. So when I look around the world and I see people who I have trained in wildlife enforcement, it's great to see that they have now risen to powers within their own countries. The thing that gave me a lot of adrenaline kick when I was your age was going undercover for 3 years. I'm not going to tell you much about it because I'm still undercover, right? No, I'm not. I'm long past that stage. But for 3 years, I worked in Japan and China, and today, when I woke up, I got the BBC News flash that Hong Kong has voted to end ivory trade. I was extremely, extremely happy. Because 1.5 of those 3 years, I was undercover in Hong Kong, trying to expose that trade. And I know what it was in those days, and I can't imagine that today's world has changed that much, that China and Hong Kong are thinking of banning the trade, or in fact have banned the trade. But the part I'm concentrating on today is my role as a wildlife diplomat, is the way I'd like to call it, is when I wear my suits and ties and get into United Nations and other multilateral agreements and spend a considerable portion of my life actually in the halls, in the rarefied halls of the UN, far away from the tropical heat of the jungles where I'm equally at home, in fact more at home. But that is a key thing that needs to be done. And that's a key place that people like you could theoretically contribute to. I never went to law school, I'm a biologist, but I had to learn my law or international law to participate in some of these discussions, and I'll come to that in a moment. But before that, now that you've known who I am, who's an Asian elephant? Yeah? It's an important thing to know the animal that you're going to study about later. You have to first know the animal. So whether I talk to primary school students or I talk to heads of state, and I do both, I describe the elephant in 4 words. Okay? Well, everybody knows an elephant is big, right? But big is a very important ecological characteristic. It's a mega herbivore. There are very few mega herbivores left in this world. Elephant is one of them. For the last 50 million years, elephants or their prototypes or elephantoids, different models that nature has created, called elephants, about 37 different kinds, roamed the world and ate grass and browse in large enough quantities to make them big. Okay? And I'll come back to this feeding habit of theirs in a moment. 2, oh, it has to be pointed here. Okay. An elephant is social. All of you know that? An elephant is matriarchal. Like me, I'm one of the few tribes in the world who's matriarchal. I come from India, in southern part of India, where all the wealth goes from my mother to my sister. I get left out. But that's why I like elephants. They're like me. The women rule the herd. Okay? And if you have lived long enough and seen enough of the world, you'll know if women rule the world, it's not a bad place to live in. So I like elephants. They're intelligent, sentient beings. They feel. There's compassion, there's deep knowledge, and there's memory. They're more intelligent than many of my friends. If we were less arrogant a species, I would call the elephant a person. I would confer personhood on an elephant. Yeah? The elephant, and this is not emotion speaking, there's enough science to show that the elephant can remember things, can recollect, has intergenerational capacity of transferring that knowledge, grieves as much as us, exults as much as us, and these can be measured. For example, there's a lovely set of papers coming from Washington State showing that elephants in trauma, for example, if you kill an elephant, the younger elephant, the calf, if the mother or father is killed, feels the same sort of trauma neurobiologically as a human accident victim or a trauma victim. Yeah? So it's very, very close to us. As we are an arrogant species and don't like to confer personhood on other species, I would still like to call the elephant a near person. It's very, very close to us. Apes, elephants, cetaceans, they're very, very close to us. And finally, it's a nomad. Remember what I told you, it eats a heck of a lot. If you confine an elephant, it'll eat itself out of the forest. And then you come to the famous conundrum that Africa is facing today as to having too many elephants. It's not too many elephants, it's too little forage because the elephants have been forced not to move. The elephant needs to move. The elephant is a nomad, you can't settle it, it needs to move and let the forest grow back. Okay, so these 4 words is the basic things that you need to know about an elephant. And if you know this, you can manage an elephant and you can love an elephant. Now, there are African elephants on your tables, at least some of them. Some of them are giraffes or lions. How do you tell an African elephant from an Asian elephant? Any one of you? Yeah, go on. I know everybody says this. Asian elephants have smaller ears. Okay, well, there's something about the ears, but I'll come to that in a minute. Any other thing? It's fascinating, you know, you talk around the globe, whether you're Japanese or Indian or American, everybody says smaller ears. Such a large animal, why didn't you notice anything more than the ears? Okay, let me tell you. To begin with, the Asian elephant is humped. Okay? It's got a hump on the back. The African elephant has a saddle. The Asian elephant is what is ridden. The African elephant is not ridden. But interestingly, the African elephant has a saddle, as if it's meant to ride. As simple as that, okay? 1. So at one glance, you can say by the shape of the animal. 2, the ears. True, this may be slightly smaller, but it's more the shape. The Asian elephant is a triangular shape, more like the shape of India, if you know the Indian map, right? Approximately. The African elephant goes a little curved at the top and then sloping towards the bottom, more like the shape of Africa, broadly. Okay? So shape is different. But look at the head. The Asian elephant has 2 domes. The African elephant has a smooth dome, and in fact, you can make out males and females depending on how that dome is smooth in African elephants. Let's not go that far. Okay, but scientifically, you can also tell them apart by looking at their trunks and their teeth. The trunks, the Asian elephant has 1 finger The African elephant has 2 fingers on both sides. Okay? And in terms of the teeth, the African elephant teeth are called lozenge-shaped, which is why their scientific name Loxodonta, lozenge-shaped teeth, which have got striations on it. The Asian elephant is a much more regular, fine-filed teeth. But that's a difficult way to identify an elephant. You can't go up to an elephant and say, please open your mouth and look at your teeth. But for this talk, one of the key reasons that an African elephant is different from an Asian elephant, one of the key features is this, which is, are you asleep at the back? What's the difference? I've even put it up. At tusks. What about tusks? No? They're both females. You can see the young ones with the mother. They're both females. The African female has tusks. Okay? In Africa, both the male and the female are tusked. Whereas Asian elephant, only the males have tusks. And not all males have tusks. So tusk is an important thing for Asian males. More like my mustache. It really tells you about masculinity. It does. The males with no tusks have lower testosterone, are less male. Right. Now, about the elephant in general in Asia, found in 13 countries. Don't bother about the exact numbers, but we're talking sub 50,000. Did you know that there were only 50,000 Asian elephants left, while there are 250,000 or 300,000 African elephants left? Now, 250,000 African elephants is bad because 100,000 has been killed over the last few years. So it's a dramatic decline. But there's still 250,000 African elephants. Whereas Asian elephants, there are only 50,000 or less than 50,000. It's much, much more critically endangered. Now, you saw these 2 things are different in the ways I told you. But if the Asian elephant goes and the African elephant stays, will the world be a poorer place? The answer is yes, because the Asian elephant is 50 million years older than the African elephant and evolved, originated, guess, in Africa, in Egypt, in the Al Fayoum swamps of Egypt. The Asian elephant originated several million years before the African elephant. And the African elephant then evolved and pushed the Asian elephant out through the Horn of Africa, into Europe as the mammoth, into the US as the mastodon, and all those models failed, or perhaps the US and Americas and Europe was not good enough for the elephants. So it came down past the big mountains, the Tian Shan and the Kunlun and the Himalayas finally, and came down to rest in South Asia and Southeast Asia, beyond the mountains, okay? Where it evolved into 10 different forms. And this is the last form that is surviving, Elephas maximus. Right. Now, I need to tell you quickly the story in 2 conventions. But I'm going to take more time on CITES and then a little time on another one. The CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, it's a mouthful, is also called the Washington Convention because that's where it was ratified. In 1975, and has 183 parties as members, meaning literally almost the whole world. Yeah? So it's an environmental convention which, unlike certain conventions that the US do not participate in, even the US participates in. So we've got almost the whole world as party to this convention. Okay? And what I'm going to discuss is the Ivory Trade, which is a trade in derivatives of living beings. Don't forget that. It's a trade with a very, very old cultural mooring in parts of the world like where I come from in India. And it's a trade that determines the fate of at least 3 species of elephants. Did you know there were 3 species of elephants? When I grew up, I was taught there were 2 species of elephants, the African and the Asian. But recently, genetics have split the African into the forest elephant of Western Africa and the savanna elephant of South and East Africa. So genetics is telling us there are 3 elephants. We do not even know that much about the largest animal that lives on land, or whether there are 2 or 3 kinds. That's the sort of ignorance we have, at the back of which we're trying to save them. So we in biology, we go with an encyclopedia of ignorance to guide us. Every year we're learning new things. This, by the way, just off the record, was when I was undercover. This was in a garage below my house, 9 tons of ivory belonging to one man. All right, this is how ivory has been used across the years. So roll to 20th or the 21st too century. Hopefully the 21st will see the extinction of that need. So what is it used for? Once again, I put it up. Anyone? Religion. No. This was art. That is chopsticks, not religion. Food can be religion, but not quite. Billiard balls. And then I'm stopping. The other 2 things, especially the white things in the corner, that's about 75 or 80% of the reason elephants are killed are those white things. And you're 100 smart American law students. Come on, you can identify it. What's that? Why are elephants killed? Did I see a hand? Sorry. Yes, sir. Sorry? Piano keys. Well, no. Piano keys used to be one of the things. I could have put that up too. True. But that is more in the past. Take a guess. I mean, where's the demand coming from? Are they from Western piano key makers? No. Demand is from China and Japan. Those are called hanko in Japan and called chop in Chinese. All right? This is a signature seal, a name seal. Because both languages, you can't sign because of script. Hieroglyphic script. So that you can't use cursive writing. Whether you write your name or sign your name, it looks the same. So how does a Japanese or Chinese sign? They affix a name seal, traditionally. Traditionally, name seals made of wood or stone or maybe buffalo horn. But as they get more money, both these cultures have tended to migrate to ivory, which culturally, according to them, is the most beautiful thing in the world. It probably is. But the reason that they use it is that, okay? And another 15% are those carved netsuke, it's called in Japan. Does this work? I don't know. Yeah, that one. Worth millions of yen, are little balls that are attached to the drawstrings of a Japanese woman's kimono, traditional kimono, netsukes. And we want a Japanese woman's kimono to be firmly tied with beautiful drawstrings. But we don't want them of ivory. That's what I've been trying to tell the Japanese for years. Okay, so the history of CITES, very quickly I'll run through 2 slides. 75, before many of you students at least who were born, the world realized that Asian elephant is endangered and let's ban the trade. Okay, so it's remained banned from 75 to now. So what's the problem? The African elephant was put on Appendix 1, which means no trade, only in 1990. Okay, and that was done because a lot of African ivory was being smuggled out and people couldn't differentiate between Asian ivory or African ivory. At least science can't. Customs officers can't. The Japanese and the Chinese trade can, because they pay different prices by looking at it. I wrote a whole book on it, how to differentiate ivory. But that's purely trade knowledge. There's no science in it. Yeah? However, soon after, 7 years after the trade ban, Southern Africa started saying that we want to sell our ivory and started linking it to many economic, developmental, and social mandates. And I'll come to that in a minute. But because of that, in 97, 3 populations of Southern Africa were brought to Appendix 2, which meant that they could put up proposals to sell their ivory. Not that they could sell it, but they could come to CITES and argue that they need to sell it. That's what happened in 99. 50 tons were allowed to be sold as a one-off. Okay? When you go to one meeting, UN meeting, or second meeting, or 3 meetings in your life, you hear these words, and they're all legalese, and it all sounds good. I've attended 27 years now, right? And I've seen one-off coming back again and again. And you realize it's not one-off. Yeah? So in 2002 in Chile, we had a meeting where a further 60 tons was allowed as a further one-off, saying, oh, countries have stockpiled ivory, and why not we use this ivory for human developmental benefit. In 2007, 5 years of battle later, we got a 9-year moratorium, which meant no ivory trade for 9 years, as long as they were given one more one-off. So third one-off of 101 tons was agreed on. Okay? The next year, that sale took place, and the moratorium was entered. In 2016, in the last COP, there was a historic call for all countries to ban domestic ivory trade. It was historic because normally CITES only regulates international trade. And by calling on countries to do something domestically, you're getting into their sovereign rights, which people normally don't like. And it's only if all the countries allow it will that be passed. That was passed. Remember, this year, or last year, now, already last year, the moratorium has ended. So when the countries meet again next year, ivory trade can be back on the table. Okay. So as I told you, I've attended this for the last 25 years. I'm not going to bore you with pictures of mine. But broadly, these are the 9 reasons that India has argued. I've attended as an NGO, I've attended as India. And in fact, the last maybe 15 or 27 years, I've argued as India. And India has been a very, very strong opponent of any ivory trade opening in any form, despite the fact that we have many Japanese friends and many African friends, but we support them on many other things, but not on this. And the reasons are as follows. All right. 1, ivory is a finite resource extracted from endangered species. Okay? Both the forest elephant, Cyclotus, and the Asian elephant are very much more endangered than the African elephant that is being put on sale. The ivory is coming, actually, the legal ivory is coming from the savanna African elephant from Kenya, from Southern Africa, from Eastern Africa. But our worry is not even that elephant. Our worry is the other 2 elephants, which are much more critically endangered and can be laundered for these 2. Okay? I told you that. There's continuous declines in those parts of the world. And as we are looking at species, there's more genetics saying that perhaps there's one more species in Africa. There's yet another paper which says a Bornean one may be a different one. So we don't even know the genetics, as I said, of the largest land animal. And we are selling their teeth. Which, by the way, I hope all of you know that you can't pull the teeth off a living elephant. Lots of, at least Chinese and Japanese I've talked to, believe that you can just go and pull the teeth off and it's all fine and the elephants can go and munch on the other molars. But you can't. The elephant will die of bleeding if you cut off its tusks. Yeah, theoretically, you could do a root canal and extract, but nobody's doing that. They're killing the animals. Okay? So, I mean, in case anybody has that feeling that you can just take the tusks off. So, as early as 1989, 2 scientists had written a landmark paper, Elephants Are Not Beetles. Yeah? They're slow-growing, slow-breeding, long-lived, socially complex, sexually dimorphic beings. You can't just farm them and use them economically. You cannot just put an economic conundrum of supply and demand on it. It doesn't work that way. This animal, like us, can live an average of 60, 65 years, can live up to 100 years, like us, each one. So it's difficult to just grow them for their tusks. Okay? And as I told you, that at least in Asian elephants, only the males and only the large males are being poached, which is exactly the opposite of natural selection. The large males with the large tusks, which are actually contributing to the population, are the ones being poached. The weaker males with the smaller tusks are being left alone. So that doesn't work. So in the worst case scenario, when we all started fighting for the elephant in Asia, was in the early 90s when things were really bleak. And at worst case scenario, we had reached a sex ratio of 1 male for every 100 females in some of our populations. Now, you're law students, but even you will know, you don't need to be biologists, that one male for 100 females does not work. Yeah? Population is going down. And enough other science, I'm not getting into detail, but these are papers of 1989. It's not rocket science, and it's still the same. Yeah? Next thing. This is the logic that has been repeatedly used by China and Japan and some African nations. If too many elephants, African nations say, some African nations, mind you, therefore, we need to kill our elephants. Cull is a euphemism for kill, of course. And it generates money, and therefore the money should be used. And if we have to use that money for a starving population, why not maximize the profit through international trade? It's an argument. The defense that we have said is too many elephants is a value judgment. Zimbabwe, which first started culling, had 2.5 elephants a square kilometer when they decided to cull. There were landmark scientific papers which said 2.5 elephants, given so many Zimbabweans, and you have to kill the elephants. India has 4.5 elephants a square kilometer. We call it God. So what's the difference? It's an ethical, it's a value judgment. It's got nothing to do with too few or too many. It depends on tourism. It is more used locally. When you concentrate it in the hands of 9 Japanese traders, when I went undercover, there were 9 people controlling the Ivory Trade. 9. I knew all of them. They were all on my speed dial, right? Because I was trading with them. 9 of them. So if you concentrate wealth into 9 people in the world, that's not really called local development. Same argument, okay? So, non-consumptive utilization, it has been shown by several studies, and I've been using these slides, and sometimes I don't update the slides with recent statistics. I can. But I show the older ones deliberately to show that from the late 80s to now, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The same dialogue can be had over and over again. When Zimbabwe sold their first ivory stockpile, that first 50 tons we were talking about, the Zimbabwean part of it supported the salaries for 15 weeks of just their conservation department. So it didn't really eradicate poverty. It didn't really bring Africans out of the black hole that they were in. No, it didn't do any of that. It just made some Japanese richer. And yes, it did pay the government some money for 15 weeks. So game viewing can really give you far more sustainable bits of money, and it can really be used, if properly planned, to benefit local communities. Next, we're talking about this Hanko being used to sign stuff. Why would today's Japanese and Chinese want to sign with an ivory, with an elephant's tooth? Both countries are fast developed and fast developing. I mean, I don't think today's youngsters, not today, but even 20 years ago, the youngsters of China and Japan had no interest to do that. They found pens. They found electronic signatures. There's no reason to go back to this. This was a dying tradition. The problem was there were 2 kinds of people who were trying to oppose this. One was the West saying, you Japanese and Chinese, you're doing something wrong. Now that will not work with Asians. I'm an Asian too. You point your finger and we go inwards and say, to hell with you all. I have 5,000 years of history and culture, and you've got 200, and you're trying to tell me something? So I go inwards. The Japanese and Chinese are the same. Yeah, I understand that. So that's wrong. So the way to do it is from within, is to talk to Chinese youth and Japanese youth and ask them, do you really want to sign with an ivory Hanko? And the answer which is coming from polls inside the country by themselves, by Japanese and Chinese, is no. This is a tradition, it's a government's, it's a political thing. But as people, no, this is outmoded. They're moving on. Okay? As I told you, 500 people a year getting killed. Conflict resolution costs are very, very high in human life and in revenue and resources to protect elephants. Just, selling few teeth are not going to help. It's an enforcement nightmare. One of this is West African, one of this is Indian, and 2 of this is savanna. Who's to tell if you're a customs officer on the border? Even the US Fish and Wildlife Service in Oregon, they got their state-of-the-art laboratory in Ashland, can't tell. Your head scientist in the US says that he was this close to coming to the difference between the two, but then the US government pulled his plug and asked him to work on bald eagles instead. So there goes the elephants, bald eagles. But now, coming to think of it, I'm glad they allowed him to work on some animal. Right, and finally, at least being an Indian, coming from a country where, as I said, it is God or demigod or we worship it, and as a biologist who has seen these animals close up, these are highly intelligent, sentient beings, and somehow I don't like the idea that we use their teeth in today's day and age. For such an esoteric use, it's not a medical emergency or anything like that. It's signing names. Surely we can find other ways of doing it rather than killing these animals. And to finish that argument, I give these talks, as I said, and 20 years ago, something like that, I was giving a talk in Japan, and I noticed an old gentleman sitting in the front, a Japanese gentleman was visibly crying as I was talking. And at the end of my talk, he came to me and he said, I'm an ivory carver of many, many years, and I've been carving ivory. And I would like to talk to you, and would you come to my home for dinner tomorrow? Now, if you know Japanese, they never call you home for anything, let alone dinner. So I grabbed the opportunity, I said, sure, I will. And I went to him. And he took me into his bedroom, and he showed me his altar. The Japanese have altars where they worship their ancestors. And on it was a piece of ivory that he had cut a few years ago, and in the lower part, you can see there's a bullet. He said, the moment I saw the bullet, the ivory carving tool had split the tusk and a bullet came out, and he said, I knew I had blood on my hands. But I have, again, Asian, he said, I have thousands of years of tradition telling me that elephants are not killed. You just go to the graveyard and pick up their tusks. And tusks are meant for us to carve. He said, now hearing your talk again, I'm convinced that there is blood on my hands. And he said, he's giving it up. He was an old man. And I gave him a small Ganesh. I often carry in my pocket, especially at the UN, I carry Ganeshas. Okay? It's good to give out to people, to remind them. I mean, it works when you come from my culture, at least. Okay. So we wrote about and argued for many years that sustainable ivory trade is an unattainable abstract. You're not going to get there. So there's no point in calling it sustainable. Okay? It's ecologically not sustainable. It's economically not sustainable. Ethically, it's abhorrent, according to me. So on all these three fronts, India argued, and except for those 3 years in 27 years, we managed to stop ivory trade at all other times. India has the only country, Asian country, co-proposing with African countries like Kenya and others that ivory should not be traded. Systematically, over 27 years, the US was very much our partner in the early 90s. I'm afraid it's not our partner anymore, does not support, wants ivory trade, is what I'm told. And that's what the US positions. Anyway, within the country, we have managed to curb poaching. And although we do a lot of things in the country to stop poaching, it's our battles in the UN that have stopped ivory trade broadly, except the 3 instances where we couldn't, that have allowed the demand to go down to an extent where my men can go out and patrol. And 30, 40, 50 are killed every year in patrols of the 50,000 people India put out to protect its tigers and its elephants. Okay? Now, quickly, another convention, much shorter. I'm not going to get into the details I did in CITES, which is UNESCO. Are you familiar with UNESCO? They have a thing on natural World Heritage sites and cultural as well, but they have a World Heritage Site declaration, which I'm sure perhaps Florida also has a number of World Heritage Sites declared. We have one such in eastern India in Manas National Park, on the border of Bhutan. If you think of India as a one-legged dancing person, that's how I show the map to people, and India's dancing like that. That's the northeast where all the biodiversity is, and Bangladesh sort of fits in here. And Bhutan is a pimple on top of the outstretched hand. Okay? So Manas is right here at the shoulder of India. It had all the attributes: sanctuary, tiger reserve, World Heritage Site. It had all the names: Man and Biosphere Site. You could give us a place. And one went into the United Nations to get it all this. But suddenly in 1989, there was an insurgency by the local tribal population which wanted to split away from India. And India did what many large democracies do. It bombed them and sent in the army, right? And there was a fight for nearly 5 years. Then there was a peace accord. But meanwhile, Manas National Park, the World Heritage Site, the Tiger Reserve, was finished. The Bodos had killed all the animals and eaten it when they were running away from the Indian Army. The Indian Army had bombed the rest. So as a result, the place was completely empty. I was sent in by UNESCO to look at it 20 years ago, to do an evaluation as to whether anything is left. And in 1992, it was put on the red list of World Heritage Sites in danger, like the sites in Syria are being put now, if you're following the news in terms of the cultural parts. Yeah? So this is a natural heritage site in danger. Once it goes on the red list in UNESCO, it rarely comes back out, because in the UN you need 2/3 majority to get a thing out. So it becomes a very, very difficult game to get things out. How many of you now, this is a good enough time to ask you, how many of you believe that if you study law well enough and get your details right, you'll win battles at the UN? Not a single person saying yes. So that's hopeful that all of you have tempered your learnings with more practical wisdom. You're right. When people come into CITES or UNESCO, I've seen many people come in and say, oh, that's a trader sitting there. This is a conservation convention. How's a trader sitting there? A trader is there because he's a member of the official delegation. Every country has a right to represent itself. And eventually, it's the ability to get your votes on the day, on the floor, that counts. So science counts, legal opinion counts, politics counts. And it's important that if I was talking to your professor and saying that you must have a module or a course or I don't know what you call it, on politics, on political ecology, or just politics, conservation politics. It's an important thing. So the politics of listing is such that once a thing goes into red list, it never comes out normally. Just some images of a wonderful place that was. So what we did was, we needed to get something big to get world attention. And we had lost in the UN to get it out. For about 10 years, India had tried, and the UN would send delegations who, because of the way it is structured, it's difficult to show that a thing has come back. Okay? When you declare a place a heritage site, you don't count the number of frogs in it, or the number of dragonflies. You just say that we have lots of frogs. But when you say it's in danger, you have to actually prove that there is so much percentage increase in your frogs, or dragonflies. Yeah? And or everything. And therefore it becomes very, very difficult. So I said that we cannot go the species route. So we have to go land route. We have to enlarge in the land and get the political will. But how do you enlarge in land in a country like India with 1.2 billion people? No place to live. No place to live for anybody. If you get a few square kilometers of land, land in India is the price of Manhattan. If you own land in India, you can probably have a big house in Tampa. Nothing else. But land is very, very expensive. People are very surprised normally when they come and find price of land in India. So what we did was, we took the most charismatic animals. Elephants first, of course, God and all that. Then rhinos, which the Assamese have great pride on. We have 2,500 of the world's one-horned rhinos, 3,000 of the world's one-horned rhinos. The only species of the 5 which is actually not going down. All the other rhino species are going down. And we took things like the clouded leopard, enigmatic. Nobody had seen it. He told you I had written the book on Indian mammals. I had to get a zoo shot from New York Zoological Garden. George Schaller sent me from the US for my book because there was no shot in the wild. Nobody had seen this animal. A leopard which goes on the forest canopy and eats monkeys. Its canine, it's twice the size of the saber-toothed tigers in terms of dimension of their skull. Of course, a smaller cat. But just the size of the canine to the skull. It's got the longest tail of any cat. It's an agile acrobat which floats along the tropical rainforest and hunts monkeys. Nobody sees it. We got one tribal boy who brought us two. Must have killed the mother and eaten it, I'm sure. He brought us two cubs. So I said, this is the chance we're waiting for. So we launched a thing of bringing back Manas. We got the clouded leopard putting back as a Nat Geo story, so the whole world could see it, of how we are reintegrating. I brought the best science in, so it was not just throwing them back. And then elephants, rhinos, bears, monkeys, you name it. As a result, especially these are all orphaned elephants, each individually orphaned, and we would make 4 herds. This takes 10 years to do one herd properly. It's not a small thing. Rhinos being brought in. And one more side thing is that when we started bringing these animals, one of the set of people who opposed us were conservationists, traditional conservationists, who said, oh, no, you're bringing individual animals, that's animal welfare, that's not conservation. And I said, hold on. When it comes to the human population, individual welfare matters just as much as the population. You don't say that let us ensure the population of Tampa is rising and we don't care what happens to your father. No, it matters. The individual matters to us, as does the population. When it comes to animals, traditional wildlife conservation has said that if populations go up, individuals be damned. So that's another bit of thing that we were not doing that. We were bringing back Manas to get a UNESCO declaration. But I wanted to show that the individual cares, that we care for the individual just as much, and that it makes good conservation sense. So only 3,000 rhinos left, and we were taking each individual rhino, and all these 3 little young ones have now given birth, have become mothers 3 times over, which in conservation terms is a success. Okay? So it's good animal welfare, it's also good conservation. And as a result of putting these animals on prime TV and with the Prime Minister and the Minister and the Chief Minister attending, the local politician says, I'm going to triple the World Heritage Park. From 500 square kilometers, he vowed to put 950 more into it, nearly 1,500 square kilometers. Never before in the history of India has so much land been put aside for conservation. He didn't do it because he was convinced by the law. He didn't do it because he was convinced by science. He did it because lovable animals were being brought back. And he was being portrayed as a hero for saving elephants and saving rhinos and saving this clouded leopard. And there were people in Nat Geo calling him up and saying, hey, you got this mysterious leopard in your forest. He liked that attention, right? So he declared all that. So that was the original Manas, just that part. And now we've added this and we've added this. In the middle, there are millions of Indians, so that's completely disjointed. It looks in this map. But remember, maps, 2-dimensional maps never work. So Earth does not fall off the edge of the map. So luckily for us, this entire area is Bhutan. It's not white, it's green actually. It's completely protected. So therefore, the protected area, as we have now shown it, extends all the way around, like that. It's like a horseshoe. Just this declaration, this one declaration, meant that in UNESCO in 2011, we got it out of the red list. We got a standing ovation for 15 minutes. The entire UN stood up for 15 minutes, said that India was the first country to reverse a red list. And we were asked, what our secrets of our success was. And I just told you what the secret of success was. Okay. So 2 examples of how we have used biodiversity on the ground and at the UN. Now I'm going to give you 5 closing points of success that you can take and learn and do yourself. Number 1, the devil is in the detail. If you are all lawyers or wanting to be lawyers, if you don't know the detail, if you don't know annotation 2.5, Rev 2, Cop 4, Annex 3, you're out of the game. As I said, I'm a biologist. I should know Latin, is what I was taught when I was young, to be a biologist. But I had to learn law on the fly, so to speak, because you have to talk that language. And if you didn't know what I just said meant Asian elephant being downlisted, then you're out of the hall, because that's the language being spoken. Nobody says elephant in the hall societies. The word hardly comes up. They just say Doc 3.4, Rev 4, yeah, Annex 2. Motion to be moved. Now you have to respond. So detail is very important. However, do not ever forget the spirit of why that convention was signed when you look at detail. If we had forgotten that, we would have lost CITES. The Southern Africans are skilled lawyers. South Africa has no dearth of skilled lawyers. They came up with some fantastic legal arguments as to why Ivory Trade should be opened, citing provisions within CITES. However, CITES was set up to regulate international trade in endangered species for the benefit of the species, not for the benefit of traders. And that spirit of why it was set up meant you would give benefit of doubt to the species, not to the traders. And just on that one point, we have won a number of precautionary principle arguments, even when Southern African data was actually stronger than East Asian data. I mean, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, they don't have data. Yeah? Southern Africans can count every single elephant and their droppings. So you had to get to the spirit, and that's important. 2, if you have a charismatic megafauna, use it. Don't say I'm a lawyer and I look at annotation 4, Rev 5. Hey, you got elephant, you say elephant loudly, so people know. So when you take up the mic, don't be afraid of using something, because the people who vote, who press that buzzer, eventually have a heart as well as a brain, and you can appeal to it. Don't be afraid. You should know your law, but don't be afraid to use something as long as you're convinced it's for the good of species. At least that is my take. Link what is happening in the sterile environments of the United Nations with something that's happening on the ground. There are more people disillusioned about the United Nations in the United Nations than outside it. They love hearing stories of hope. They love feeling that the conventions actually have some teeth on the ground. They love being reminded that, okay, this country is not just coming here as a delegation and telling me some pretty things, but he's going back or she's going back and doing some real work on the ground and coming back to report the next time as to progress on the ground. So linking those stories with your proposals and documents on the floor of the House is extremely important. Don't forget the local people. In today's politics, and I told you politics is important, the politics is about people. It's not about animals, right? So if you have local community intervening, even after all your country interventions are over, if there's a community group or an NGO who intervenes and says that what you have proposed on the floor of the House is anti-people, you are much, much less likely to get it passed, even if it has ticked all the boxes in today's era. No country would like to put its hand up and say, okay, we are going to do something against the people of that place. So ensure you have the communities of the area with you on whatever the proposal is. And finally, keep talking, negotiate. You have to be very good talkers, yeah? Well, that, if you're all lawyers or getting to be lawyers, you'll be good talkers, I'm sure. Never give up. So one final story, I suppose. I was told by Roy that you all run off at 1. And 1 it is. So one final story. I was advisor to the delegation negotiating tiger trade with the Chinese. I mean, it was not, I was an Indian delegation, but it was literally the whole world trying to negotiate with the Chinese on reopening international trade in tiger parts. Tiger parts internationally was banned for a long time. But domestically, China was allowed because it didn't come under international regulations. And then the European Union made a very stupid mistake and brought in a paper asking China to regulate domestic things in an international convention. And China hit them over the head with a hammer and said, you are getting onto our sovereign rights, and therefore, we are now moving a paper saying we want to revert all international trade. And in the UN, you know, with China being one of the countries with the veto, if they went against it, we could not have stopped it. So we negotiated for 15 days and nights, well into the night, 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., I was still at the table. One by one, people were falling off the negotiation. The Chinese was led by the ambassador to the UN, a lady who was fearsome, to put it the least, and doing a good job to protect her country's integrity. So finally, on the 14th day, literally almost nobody left on that table except the Chinese delegation, and there were 2 Europeans and me. Everybody had gone off to sleep. And I asked her, I said, Ambassador, were you at the table when international trade was banned? So she said, no. So I said, see, neither was I. So I said, what are you trying to do here? You are trying to go back to China as a hero, right? She didn't say anything. I said, all right. I said, but I am trying to go back to India as a hero. We're both bureaucrats. We both have to do our job. You have to defend China, I have to defend India. But if you try to reopen something when you were not at the table when it happened, it's not going to matter for you. Let's talk about now. This current resolution moved by the EU says that we will impinge on China's sovereignty. I'll ensure we pull that back. You can go back as a hero and say that, or heroine, and say that China can now trade in tiger bones domestically. But let's not go to a point where neither you were there nor I was there, because whoever wins, we are not going to be heroes. And she looked at me and smiled, and she said, done. So next morning, I was the first one to put up my placard, and I said that India wants to strongly support China. And there was shocked silence in the hall. I said, we are neighbors, we are partners, we have economic things going for us. And we strongly condemn the European Union for having tried to open domestic trade in tiger parts, to ban domestic trade in tiger parts. Immediately, China stood up and said that they support India and they would no longer press for international trade to be removed. We won that debate unilaterally on the floor of the House. International trade was not reopened. Domestic trade was always allowed, actually, except at that meeting, somebody had just put a piece of paper saying he wanted it banned. That was just a wish. It was never the ability of the international community to tell China what to do inside China. But by appealing to that lady's personal requirements and needs when she went back to Beijing, we had got that negotiating clause, which 14 days of reading text did not get us. So keep negotiating and keep talking to the person you're talking to, convinced of what you want at the end. But eventually, friends, I want to end by saying conservation is the art of the possible. It's not. I'm a scientist. I'm schooled as a scientist. I've written many scientific papers. But if you believe in only science, or perhaps in only law, you would get the word impossible sooner than if you believe in the finesse of the art of negotiating and getting something through. Okay? So that's all I have to say today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vivek. That was an incredibly informative and inspirational talk. And I mean, such excellent advice for the law students here, and I think the messages here reinforce much of what you hear in many of your classes. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions or comments.
You mentioned how sentient the elephant is, and I was wondering, among the psychological ramifications of when an elephant loses its mother, those orphaned elephants, what are the psychological ramifications as they now have their own, I guess, elephant children? What are the psychological ramifications for those now orphaned elephants as they start their own families?
So in Africa, this is much better studied than in Asian elephants. As I told you, the elephants that were part of the cull, the mothers and fathers were culled, and the young ones were moved into South Africa's Pilanesberg National Park. And most of those elephants have turned out to be psychotic, neurotic individuals, and that have been studied very, very well. And offline, I can tell you some stories of shocking behavior of animals. In India, our orphans, we did some stress studies on them. And the animals that were ridden in the forest, captive elephants, had less stress than the orphans which were being protected by the Wildlife Trust of India. Because animals don't know they're being protected, they're orphans. So just by the fact that you're orphans, you're more stressed than if you're chained and ridden. Because you're an adult animal and you've got used to it and you've gotten over it. So just like human beings sometimes accept captivity or enslavement more, elephants also do that. But young ones suffer greatly.
Oftentimes on TV, you see people applauding the fact that ivory is being burned. Is that something that we should be applauding when ivory gets burned and removed from the market, or how should we take that as students? Is that a positive or a negative?
Yeah, it depends on the culture you grew up in, I suppose. So in India, I applaud when it's burnt because it's of no use for me. It's the body part of an animal which is a close relative. You cremate it. I do that to body parts of anything that dies that's close to me. We don't keep it as symbols of power or this thing. But if some country says that it wants to carve it or do something within the country, at least in the UN, we will not protest as long as it doesn't enter international market.
I was wondering briefly, what is the current state of black market trade internationally in ivory? Has there been progress made in clamping down on black market trade, or is that an additional problem we need to be concerned about?
No, so as I told you, currently there is no international trade. But the moratorium has just ended in November last year. The next CITES meeting is in Sri Lanka 10 months from now. So at the next CITES meeting, we'll know. I'm reasonably sure there'll be people who will come back to the table saying they want to sell more ivory. Because wherever there's money, no UN convention ever debates, let's give handguns to our children, or let's legalize narcotics. But this one, it happens. I'm sure a year down the line, this will come up again for discussion.
Other questions? Let me take. Good.
Okay, one last one.
When you were describing trying to pressure politicians in India to expand the national monument, you mentioned using the carrot of offering praise and making the politician a hero for expanding it. What I'm wondering is if you ever had to use a stick per se to get him to that point, and how did you go about applying pressure to get him willing to make that expansion outside of heaping praise?
Yeah. So the stick was applied by the UN by putting their site in danger. The stick was only pride, nothing else. There is no economic bearing on what UNESCO does actually on ground. UNESCO is one of those, unlike CITES, which has a direct economic impact. UNESCO does not have. But this was pride. The local people, you see, they were forced into their forest and they cut their own forest because the Indian army were chasing them. That was survival. So they were, as it is, they were hurt that they had destroyed their own treasure. Now the UN globally was saying that their site was in danger. And repeatedly the Bodo chieftains told me that, you mean we are as bad as the situation in Somalia and Syria? No, we are much better. So, but why are we in the same list? Because those are the lists of things endangered. So they were, as it is, wanting to get out of that in danger list. So in a sense, what the UN did of putting that in danger worked.
Great. If I could just ask one last question. So what can we in this room do to assist you in your work for elephant conservation?
Okay, that's a great question, I think. To begin with, if every individual knows some more about the issue than they did before I gave the talk, that itself is something served, because there is so much misinformation going around regarding these topics, and it's also a complicated topic. But given that all of you or most of you are studying law, and many of you may wish to pursue environmental law or such things that will have societal impact, it's important for you to know how you can play a part. And the international treaties, multilateral treaties, are one of those areas where you can play a positive part, where people having a background in law, but then being tempered by such ground realities as I'm showing you, will be formidable warriors. But purely in the next few months or years or whatever you're talking about, all of you students are welcome to collaborate both with us, the Wildlife Trust of India. If you have an India opportunity, you come and intern with us, come and work with us, I have no issue. But I'm also advising a large group here called IFAW, International Fund for Animal Welfare, based out of Cape Cod. And if you think Cape Cod has some attraction to you more than Florida, and you wish to intern with them at their headquarters and or their offices around the world, or in Washington, D.C., they have an office, so I mean, they're around the world, I will put in a word with the president, to whom I am a senior advisor to. So this could be a good piece of advice, that I met a bunch of young students who are wishing to do something, and we can try to do that. The other thing we could do also is, as I said, we have training programs which we are doing across the world, largely aimed at enforcement agencies, but they have a legal component. We could help you, devise something for your course and partner in that, and maybe provide you a stream of people who can come at times when you wish and teach your students and do special courses or classes out of IFAW. From WTI, it's a little far to come each time, but out of IFAW, I can definitely manage that for you.
Well, thank you for that. I look forward to following up in the conversations this afternoon. Please join me in thanking Vivek Menon.
Thank you.